The air hung thick over Wichita in the summer of 1859. Dust rose from the main street in slow spirals, catching the late afternoon sun like amber smoke. Buildings leaned against one another as if exhausted by the heat. Horses stood tethered to posts, tails swishing flies that had grown fat and lazy in the Kansas heat. On the roof of the grain warehouse, a young woman crouched in shadow. 19 years old, though her eyes carried decades more. Her dress was black, practical dusty. Her hands were steady. They held a Sharps rifle like it was an extension of bone and sinew. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a single point. A man in a black coat stepped from the bank. He paused on the boardwalk, adjusting his hat. Sunlight glinted off the watch chain across his vest. He smiled at something, perhaps a private joke, perhaps satisfaction at a job well done. The woman on the roof exhaled, not a sigh, a technique, emptying her lungs so her chest would not rise and fall, so the rifle would not waver. Her finger curled around the trigger. The metal was warm from her skin. The rifle cracked. The sound split the dusty air like lightning through summer clouds. The man in the black coat stumbled. His hand went to his chest. Red bloomed across white fabric. He looked down at it with an expression of surprise, as if his own body had betrayed him. Then he fell. Not dramatically. Just a sudden absence of vertical, one moment upright, the next horizontal in the dirt. By the time his body settled, the woman was gone, the rifle with her. Only the wind remained stirring dust over boot prints that would vanish by morning. 30 years later, those boot prints still echoed. Montana Territory spread wide and unforgiving in October of 1889. The land rolled in gentle waves of brown grass, broken by stands of pine that darkened the hillsides like bruises. The sky pressed down enormous and indifferent. It was the kind of sky that made a person feel small, the kind that made secrets seem impossible to keep. Ruth Marlowe knelt at her husband's grave. The headstone was simple granite already gathering moss in its carved letters. 6 years of weather had softened the edges. Soon the name would blur. Soon it would be just another stone marker in a field of forgotten men. She scrubbed at the moss with a cloth dampened from the creek. Her hands shook. Not from the cold, though October brought frost to the mornings now. Not from grief, though she had loved the man beneath the stone. Her hands shook because they remembered. Because muscle has memory that the mind cannot erase. The sound came first. Hoofbeats, but not the usual rhythm of a traveler passing through. These were deliberate, measured. The sound of someone who had already arrived and was simply announcing the fact. Ruth looked up slowly. A man sat on horseback at her fence line, perhaps 50 yards distant. He did not dismount, did not call out, just sat there silhouetted against the afternoon sun. His hat brim shadowed his face. His posture was relaxed, patient, like he had all the time in the world. Ruth's hand moved to her hip, an old instinct, but there was no gun there. Had not been for 6 years. Not since the day they buried her husband, and she swore she was done with all of that. Done with the weight of metal against her leg. Done with the calculations of distance and wind and the split second between intention and consequence. The stranger shifted in his saddle. The leather creaked. Even from this distance, Ruth could hear it. The silence of the Montana plains carried sound like water carried light. Everything traveled farther than it should. The man spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Ruth Marlowe. A pause. The wind stirred dry grass. Or should I call you Constance Ray? The name hit her like a fist. That name had died in Kansas 3 decades ago, burned in a warehouse fire that consumed all records, buried in an unmarked grave with a body that wore her clothes but not her face. That name was ash and memory and nothing more. Ruth stood. The wet cloth fell from her hand. She did not pick it up. The stranger tipped his hat, not in greeting, in acknowledgement, like a man recognizing an old acquaintance at a distance. Then he turned his horse and rode slowly toward the western rise. He did not look back. He did not need to. He had made his point. Ruth watched until he disappeared over the hill. Then she stood there longer, staring at the empty horizon. The sun slipped lower. Shadows stretched across the grass. The temperature dropped. She did not move. Finally, when the first stars appeared, she walked back to the cabin. Her steps were measured, automatic. The kind of walking a body does when the mind is elsewhere. Inside she lit a lamp. The flame caught steadied cast warm light across rough walls. The cabin was small, one room for living, one for sleeping, a stove, a table, a chair, the accumulated debris of a life lived simply, or a life lived in hiding. Ruth sat at the table. Her hands lay flat against the worn wood. She could feel the grain beneath her palms, could feel the slight warp where moisture had once swelled the planks. She focused on these sensations, on the physical, on anything but the name the stranger had spoken. But the name would not be ignored. Constance Ray, the woman who took contracts, who stood on rooftops and fired from church steeples and vanished into crowds before the smoke cleared. The woman who killed for money. 11 times. 11 men who never saw her coming. 11 bodies that fell before they understood the world had turned against them. Ruth closed her eyes, saw them all. Not their faces. She had never looked at their faces, only their shapes through a scope, only the space they occupied, the negative outline that defined a target. She opened her eyes. The lamp flame wavered in a draft. Tomorrow she would rise early, feed the chickens, repair the fence that sagged near the creek. Live her life as Ruth Marlowe, widow rancher woman of simple means and simpler past. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, she would open the floorboards and look at what lay beneath. The days that followed held a strange quality. Time moved normally. The sun rose and set. The chickens ate their feed. The fence posts stood where they had always stood, but Ruth felt as though she moved through water, as though the air itself had thickened. The stranger did not leave. He made camp on public land 200 yards from her property line, just visible if she stood on the porch and looked west. Smoke from his fire rose in the mornings. His horse grazed the sparse grass. He did not approach again, did not speak again, just existed, a presence, a reminder. Ruth went about her routines, but she felt his eyes, felt the weight of observation. It was a sensation she remembered from the old days, from Kansas and Missouri and the Oklahoma territories, the feeling of being hunted, or perhaps the feeling of being the hunter who had suddenly become prey. On the third day she rode into town. The settlement was small, one main street, a general store, a saloon, a church that held services every other Sunday when the circuit preacher made his rounds, and a sheriff's office. Sheriff William Cord sat behind a desk, scarred by years of boots propped on its surface. He was 54 now, gray in his beard, lines around his eyes from squinting into too many sunsets. But his hands were steady, his gaze clear. He looked up when Ruth entered. Something passed across his face. Recognition, memory, maybe regret. Ruth. William. They had been lovers once, a lifetime ago in Kansas before she became Constance Ray, and he became a man who wore a badge. Before choices split them onto different paths. Before everything that followed. Ruth sat in the chair across from his desk. The wood creaked beneath her weight. "There's a man camped near my property," she said. William nodded. He already knew. In a town this small, everyone knew everything, or thought they did. "Been there 3 days," William said. "Has he threatened you?" "No." "Trespassed?" "No." "Then, legally, I cannot move him along." Ruth looked at him, really looked. Saw the wedding ring he still wore, though his wife had died 2 years prior. Saw the way his shoulders carried themselves squared by responsibility. Saw the man he had become in the decades since Kansas. "He knows," she said quietly. William's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. A recognition of danger, of complication. "Knows what?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already understood. "Who I was." The words hung in the small office. Outside a wagon rattled past. A dog barked. Life continued in its ordinary way while something irrevocable settled between them. William leaned back in his chair. It creaked. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "How many people know about Kansas? Just you. And now him." "Does Iris know?" Ruth shook her head. Her daughter, 21 years old, teaching school in town, smart, sharp kind. Everything Ruth had never been at that age. Everything Ruth had tried to build with borrowed time and a new name. "You should tell her," William said. "I know." "Before someone else does." "I know." But knowing and doing were different countries. Ruth stood. The interview was over. She had come for help and found only confirmation of what she already understood. She was alone in this, as she had always been. She turned to leave. William's voice stopped her. "Ruth?" She paused. Did not turn. "If you need me," he said. "I'm here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The weight of history, of choices made and not made, of a love that had never quite died but had learned to live quietly in the spaces between other things. Ruth nodded once, then left. The ride back to the ranch took an hour. The sky was enormous. Clouds moved slowly across it like great ships on an invisible sea. The grass whispered. Ruth's horse knew the way. She let the reins hang loose and thought about everything and nothing. When she arrived home, the stranger's campfire smoke still rose in the distance. Thin, gray, steady. That night, Ruth opened the floorboards. The hiding place was simple. A section of planking near the stove that lifted free if you knew where to press. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the things she had not touched in 6 years. First, the wanted poster. Old paper yellowed, the ink fading. A crude sketch of a woman's face. Not accurate. They had never seen her clearly, but accurate enough. The name beneath, Constance Ray. The reward, $5,000, dead or alive. The crimes listed in small print. Murder, assassination, contract killing. Second, the letters, tied with string. Correspondence from people who had paid her. Families desperate for justice that the law would not provide. Abolitionists who needed slave catchers stopped. People who had exhausted every legal avenue and turned to her as a last resort. Some of the letters thanked her. Some paid her. Some simply described their grief and left the rest unsaid. Third, the rifle. Ruth lifted it from its wrapping. The metal was cold, the wood smooth. She had oiled it once a year, a ritual, a way of remembering, or perhaps a way of ensuring that if the past ever came calling, she would be ready. The Sharps rifle, .50 caliber, capable of accuracy at distances that seemed impossible. She had bought it in 1858 with money saved from seamstress work, had practiced until her shoulder bruised purple from the recoil, had learned to calculate wind and distance and the arc of a bullet's fall, had become in the span of 2 years one of the finest shots west of the Mississippi. She had also become a killer. Ruth sat on the floor, the rifle across her lap. The lamp cast her shadow large against the wall. She looked at her hands, 50 years old now, lined, scarred, capable hands. Hands that had fired this rifle 11 times and never missed. She did not load it, did not lift it to her shoulder, just held it. Let the weight of it remind her of the weight of choices, of consequences that rippled forward through time like stones thrown into still water. Outside, a coyote called. Another answered. The night sounds of Montana, wild and indifferent, the same sounds that had filled other nights in other places when she had been a different woman with a different name. Ruth closed her eyes. Kansas returned in fragments, rooftops, scopes, the moment before each trigger pull, the silence after. She thought about the people who had hired her, good people mostly, people fighting against cruelty, people who had nowhere else to turn. She thought about the men she had killed, whether they had families, whether they had been loved, whether in the moment before the bullet found them they had felt anything at all. She thought about justice, about the difference between law and right, about the gray spaces where desperate people made choices that would haunt them forever. When she opened her eyes again, the lamp had burned low. The room was cold. She wrapped the rifle back in its oilcloth, placed it beneath the floor, replaced the boards, stood on legs stiff from sitting. Tomorrow the stranger would still be there. Tomorrow she would still be Ruth Marlowe. But tonight she had visited Constance Ray, had acknowledged her, had remembered. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought dreams. A rooftop, a scope, a man in a black coat, the moment before, the moment after, the eternal space between. Morning arrived without mercy. Ruth woke to gray light and the sound of her own breathing. She rose, dressed, built a fire in the stove, made coffee, went through the motions of living. Outside she fed the chickens. They clustered around her feet, their feathers bright in the thin sunlight. Simple creatures, their needs uncomplicated. Food, water, shelter. They had no past to escape, no future to fear, only the immediate moment and the next handful of grain. Ruth envied them. She was mending fence when the second rider appeared. This one came from the east, from the direction of town. The horse moved at an easy pace. No urgency, just the steady rhythm of distance covered. The rider was a man, younger than the stranger who camped to the west. He rode well, comfortable in the saddle. When he reached the property line, he dismounted. Ruth set down her tools, walked toward him. Her hand did not go to her hip this time. She had learned that lesson. The young man removed his hat. His face was weathered but kind. His eyes held something Ruth recognized: reluctance, the look of someone forced into a situation not of their choosing. "Mrs. Marlowe, yes. My name is Gabriel Dutton." The surname struck her. Dutton. She knew that name, knew it from Kansas, from wanted posters and newspaper reports and the letters she had burned. Gabriel saw the recognition in her face, nodded. "Ezra Dutton is my father, the man camped on your western border." Ruth said nothing, waited. "I came to talk to you, before things go further." "Further how?" Gabriel looked away, toward the mountains, toward anything but her eyes. "My father is dying, lung disease, 6 months, maybe less." The wind picked up, carried the smell of pine and cold earth. "This search for you," Gabriel continued, "this revenge, it's all he has left. His last purpose. I tried to talk him out of it, tried to convince him that the past should stay buried, but he wouldn't listen." "Why are you telling me this?" Gabriel met her eyes then. His gaze was direct, honest. "Because I don't believe in inherited debts. Whatever happened in Kansas, it happened before I was born. My Uncle Preston died 30 years ago. My father has spent 3 decades chasing a ghost. And I'm tired of watching him destroy himself. What do you want from me? Confession. Public acknowledgement. Let my father have that. Let him die knowing the truth was spoken. Then maybe he can let go." Ruth studied the young man, saw sincerity, saw exhaustion, saw someone caught between loyalty and conscience. "And after," she asked, "after your father dies and I have confessed, what then?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I honestly don't know." They stood in silence. The chickens pecked at the ground nearby. The sun climbed higher. Somewhere a hawk cried. "There's more," Gabriel said. "Something my father doesn't know." Ruth waited. "A man named Vernon Slade, land speculator. He found my father 8 months ago, offered him money, resources, help tracking you down. My father thinks Slade is simply a concerned citizen, a man who believes in justice. But Slade is buying up every ranch in this valley. He wants the land for a railroad route. Your property is the last piece. My father's revenge quest is just a tool. Slade is using his grief." The pieces fell into place. Ruth saw it clearly now. The larger game. The way personal tragedy became leverage. The way old wounds could be weaponized by those who knew how to exploit them. "Why are you telling me this?" Ruth asked again. "Because you deserve to know what you're up against. And because—" Gabriel paused, looked at her directly. "Because I think you're more than what you did 30 years ago, and I think my father is too. But if this plays out the way Slade wants, you both lose." Ruth nodded slowly. "Thank you." Gabriel replaced his hat, prepared to mount his horse, then stopped. "Mrs. Marlowe, one more thing. Your daughter, Iris." Ruth's heart clenched. "What about her?" "She's been asking questions about her birth parents." The orphanage finally responded to her letters. The world tilted. Ruth felt it shift beneath her feet. What did they tell her? "I don't know the details, but she received a letter yesterday. I saw her reading it outside the schoolhouse. She looked shaken." Gabriel mounted, touched his hat brim. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of hard news, but I thought you should know." He rode away. Ruth stood alone in her yard. The fence post leaned at an angle. The chickens scratched the dirt. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. She walked to the cabin. Each step deliberate, each breath measured. Inside, she sat at the table. Her hands lay flat against the wood, the grain beneath her palms, the slight warp. Focus on the physical, on anything but the rising panic. Iris had the letter. Iris knew something. But what? How much Ruth thought about the orphanage, about the baby girl she had found there 21 years ago, 3 years old, frightened, alone. The orphanage mistress had been vague about the child's origins, parents deceased, no other family. A common story in those years, the territories were full of orphans, full of children whose parents had succumbed to disease or violence or simple bad luck. Ruth had taken the girl, not from guilt, not then. She had not known, had not made the connection, had simply seen a child in need and felt something stir, some buried maternal instinct, some desire to build something good from the ruins of her old life. Only later had she learned the truth. Only later had the pieces come together, the dates, the locations, the names. Preston Dutton had died in August 1859. His wife Mary had died in childbirth in 1868. The baby, a daughter, had been sent to an orphanage in Kansas. That same orphanage where Ruth, now calling herself Ruth Marlowe, widow of a man named Jacob Marlowe, who had conveniently died of fever, had arrived looking to adopt. Fate, chance, divine irony. Whatever name one gave it, the result was the same. Ruth had spent 21 years raising the daughter of the man she had killed. And now Iris knew, or was about to know, or knew enough to ask questions that would unravel everything. The door opened. Ruth looked up. Iris stood in the doorway. 21 years old, tall, slender, dark hair pulled back, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. In her hand, a letter. The paper looked official, the kind of stationery institutions used. Mother and daughter looked at each other. A lifetime of love and lies stretched between them. "We need to talk," Iris said. Her voice was calm, but Ruth heard the tremor beneath, heard the fear, the confusion, the beginning of understanding. "Yes," Ruth said, "we do." Iris entered, closed the door, sat at the table. She placed the letter between them. The paper seemed to glow in the lamplight, seemed to pulse with information, with truth that could not be unspoken. "I wrote to the orphanage 2 years ago," Iris said, "asking about my birth parents. They never responded. I thought maybe the records were lost, or maybe they just didn't care. But yesterday this arrived." She pushed the letter toward Ruth. Ruth did not pick it up, did not need to. She knew what it said. "Your father's name was Preston Dutton," Iris said. "He died in Kansas in 1859. Your mother's name was Mary Dutton. She died in 1868. They list no other family." Ruth's hands remained flat against the table, still, controlled. "Did you know," Iris asked, "when you adopted me, did you know who my father was?" This was the moment, the fulcrum. Everything that came after would depend on what Ruth said next. She could lie, could say no, could pretend ignorance, could maintain the fiction for a little longer, or she could tell the truth, all of it. The weight she had carried alone for 21 years. Ruth looked at her daughter, saw the girl she had raised, the woman she had become. Saw intelligence and strength and goodness that had somehow flourished despite being planted in soil fertilized by blood. "No," Ruth said. "When I adopted you, I didn't know. It was the truth. Partial, but true. But you found out later." Not a question, a statement. Ruth nodded. "When you were 5 years old, I saw a newspaper, an obituary for Mary Dutton. It mentioned her husband, Preston, died in Kansas. I made the connection." Iris was quiet, processing. Ruth watched her face, saw the calculations, the timeline, the implications. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought I was protecting you." "From what?" "From the truth about your father." "What truth?" And here it was, the edge of the precipice. Ruth could step back, could offer soft lies, or she could step forward into the free fall of honesty. "Your father was not a good man, Iris. He was involved in things, bad things. He hurt people." "What kind of things?" Ruth closed her eyes, saw the wanted posters, the newspaper accounts, the letters from families Preston Dutton had terrorized. "He was a slave catcher. During the Kansas troubles, he hunted escaped slaves, returned them to bondage. Sometimes he burned homes, killed people who tried to help runaways." The words fell like stones, heavy, final. Iris stared at her. "How do you know this?" "Because I was there in Kansas. I saw what men like him did." It was not the full truth, But it was close. Close enough that Ruth felt the weight of it, the nearness of confession. "Did you know him?" Iris asked. "Did you ever meet my father?" And here Ruth lied, looked her daughter in the eyes, and spoke the words that would preserve her secret just a little longer. "No, I never met him." Iris held her gaze, searching, looking for deception. Ruth kept her face still, neutral. Years of practice, years of hiding. Finally, Iris looked away, stood. The letter remained on the table. "I need time," she said. "I need to think. I understand. I'm going to stay with Miss Brennan at the schoolhouse for a few days." Ruth nodded, could not speak, could not trust her voice. Iris walked to the door, paused with her hand on the latch. "Mother," she said, not looking back. "Whatever else is true, whatever you're not telling me, I know you love me." "More than anything," Ruth whispered. The door opened, closed. Iris was gone. Ruth sat alone in the cabin. The letter lay on the table. She picked it up, read the official words, the cold, bureaucratic language that described a life. Birth, death, orphaning. She thought about Preston Dutton, about the moment she had seen him through the scope, about the choice she had made, about the bullet that had ended him and set in motion everything that followed. She thought about consequences, about how they rippled forward through time, how they touched lives not yet born, how they shaped futures in ways impossible to predict. Outside, the sun moved toward evening. Shadows lengthened. The stranger's campfire smoke rose in the distance. A reminder, a threat, a promise of reckoning. Ruth folded the letter, placed it in her pocket, stood. Her body felt heavy, old. 50 years of living, 30 years of running. She walked to the window, looked out at her land, the place she had built, the life she had made, all of it resting on a foundation of lies. How long before it all came down? How long before the truth buried 30 years ago clawed its way to the surface? She did not know, could not know. But she felt it coming, felt the pressure building, felt the past pressing against the present like floodwater against a dam. Soon the dam would break. Soon everything would be swept away. Ruth turned from the window. The cabin was dark now. She did not light the lamp, just sat in the gathering shadows and waited for whatever came next. Outside, night fell across Montana. Stars appeared. The wind rose, and in the distance a campfire burned, patient, unrelenting, the light of a man who would not leave until he had what he came for. Justice, or revenge, or perhaps there was no difference anymore. Ruth closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. Dawn came cold to Montana, the kind of cold that settled into bones and stayed there. Ruth stood on her porch watching frost melt from the fence rails. Steam rose from her coffee cup. Her breath misted in the morning air. Everything looked clean, washed, new, as if the night had erased the previous day's revelations. But nothing was erased. Nothing ever was. The stranger's camp still smoked in the distance, a thin column rising straight into still air. No wind today, the world holding its breath. Ruth drank her coffee. It was bitter. She had let it steep too long, or perhaps everything tasted bitter now. Perhaps her tongue had forgotten sweetness. She heard the horse before she saw it, the sound of hooves on frozen ground, deliberate, unhurried. Coming from the direction of town, Iris appeared over the eastern rise. She sat straight in the saddle, her posture rigid, not the easy seat of someone comfortable on horseback, the stiff spine of someone armoring themselves against the world. Ruth set down her cup, watched her daughter approach, felt her heart do something complicated. Love and fear and guilt tangled together until they became indistinguishable from one another. But Iris did not stop at the cabin. She turned her horse west, toward the stranger's camp, toward Ezra Dutton. Ruth's hand found the porch rail, gripped it, watched her daughter ride away toward a man who held all their futures in his weathered hands. There was nothing she could do, no way to stop this. The past had arrived, was arriving, would continue arriving until every debt was paid. Ruth went inside. The cabin felt empty, colder than the air outside. She built up the fire in the stove, but it did not help. Some coldness came from within. She sat at the table, the same table where Iris had sat last night, where the letter had lain between them, where Ruth had lied to her daughter's face and felt something inside herself crack. Time passed. Ruth did not move, just sat, waiting. There was nothing else to do. When Iris returned, the sun stood high. Noon or near enough. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She had been crying. Ruth saw the tracks the tears had left, salt stains on cold cheeks. Iris dismounted, tied her horse, walked past the cabin without looking at Ruth, went to the small room she had slept in as a child. The door closed. The sound was soft, final. Ruth remained at the table. She could go to that door, could knock, could try to explain. But what words existed for this? What language could bridge the gap between what had been done and what could never be undone? She stood, walked to the door of Iris's room, raised her hand, let it hover near the wood, then lowered it again. Some distances could not be crossed. Some separations were necessary. Grief needed space. Understanding needed time. Ruth turned away, put on her coat, left the cabin. She had somewhere to be, someone to see, old debts of a different kind to acknowledge. The ride to town took longer than usual. Ruth's horse sensed her mood, moved carefully, as if the ground itself might break beneath them. The town looked the same as always, a handful of buildings huddled against the vastness of sky and plain. Civilization's tiny foothold in a land that cared nothing for human ambition. The general store, the saloon, the church with its crooked steeple, the sheriff's office with its barred window. Ruth tied her horse outside the sheriff's office. The wood of the hitching post was smooth, worn by countless rains, countless arrivals and departures, the small rituals of frontier life. She entered without knocking. William Cord looked up from papers scattered across his desk. He did not seem surprised to see her. Perhaps he had been expecting this. Perhaps he had always known it would come to this. "William," she said. "Ruth, sit." She sat. The chair creaked. Everything in this office was old, worn, functional, like the man who occupied it. William leaned back, studied her face. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." "Coffee?" "No." They sat in silence. Outside, a wagon rattled past. A child laughed. Normal sounds, the world continuing despite everything. Ruth spoke first. The words came hard, like stones pulled from deep water. "I need to tell you everything. All of it. No more pieces. No more half-truths." William nodded. "All right." "My real name is Constance Ray. I was born in Ohio in 1840. My parents died when I was 12. Cholera. I went to live with an uncle in Kansas. He taught me to shoot, to hunt. When he died, I was 16, alone. I had a rifle and a skill and nothing else." She paused. William waited, patient, the way he had always been. The Kansas troubles were starting. Bleeding Kansas, they called it. Pro-slavery men crossing from Missouri, burning homesteads, hunting escaped slaves, terrorizing abolitionists. The law did nothing. Could do nothing. It was chaos. Ruth's hands lay flat on the desk. She watched them as she spoke, as if they belonged to someone else. Families started approaching me, quietly, desperate people. They would tell me about men who had killed their sons, their fathers, men who burned their homes. They would offer me money, not much, what little they had, and they would ask me to do what the law would not. "You became an assassin," William said. No judgment in his voice, just statement of fact. "I became a killer. I don't know if there's a difference. I took 11 contracts between 1858 and 1859. 11 men died, all of them slave catchers, all of them murderers themselves, but that doesn't change what I did, doesn't make it clean." She looked up, met his eyes. Preston Dutton was the 11th, August 1859 in Wichita. He had just led a raid that burned a settlement of free blacks, killed 17 people, women, children. The families who survived pooled their money, hired me. I took the contract. I shot him from a warehouse roof, 340 yards, clean shot. He died instantly. William's expression did not change, but something moved behind his eyes, recognition of the distance between the girl he had loved and the woman she had become. After Preston, I knew I had to stop, knew I was becoming something I could not come back from, so I arranged my own death. Warehouse fire. A body wearing my clothes. Enough damage that identification was impossible. Constance Ray died. I became Ruth Marlowe, moved to Montana, met Jacob, married him, tried to build a life. And Iris? William asked. This was the part that hurt most, the part Ruth had never spoken aloud. I didn't know. When I adopted her from that orphanage in Kansas, I had no idea she was Preston Dutton's daughter. It was just chance, terrible chance. I saw a child who needed a home. I took her. Only years later, I learned the truth. By then, she was mine. I loved her. I couldn't give her back, couldn't tell her, so I carried it alone. The silence that followed was profound, complete. The kind of silence that followed confessions, that followed the speaking of truths too heavy to carry unshared. William stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street, at the ordinary day unfolding, at people who did not know that in this small office a woman had just unburdened 30 years of secrets. When he turned back, his face was careful, controlled. I need to tell you something too, he said, something I've carried. Ruth waited. In 1860, I was offered a marshal's badge, federal appointment. My job was to hunt down wanted criminals from the Kansas troubles. One name on the list was Constance Ray. I turned down the badge, told them I was moving to Montana, starting over. He sat on the edge of his desk, closer now, near enough that Ruth could see the lines around his eyes, the silver in his beard, the accumulation of years and choices. I told myself it was because I wanted a quieter life, because I was tired of violence. But the truth is, I suspected. Not knew, but suspected. There was something about you back in Kansas, the way you moved, the way you understood trajectories and distances, the way you could estimate range by eye. I thought maybe you were just a good hunter, but part of me wondered. Ruth felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had not known was there. You protected me, she said. I chose not to hunt you. That's different. Is it? William smiled, sad and tired. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. They looked at each other. Two people who had loved once, who had gone separate ways, who had carried separate burdens, who had ended up here, in this moment, with all their secrets finally spoken. What happens now? Ruth asked. That depends on Ezra Dutton and on Vernon Slade and on how much fight you have left. I'm tired of fighting. I know, but I don't think you have a choice. He was right. Ruth knew it. Had known it since the moment Ezra had spoken her old name. Some fights found you, whether you wanted them or not. She stood, prepared to leave. William's voice stopped her. Ruth, if it comes to choosing, between protecting yourself and protecting Iris, what will you do? She did not hesitate. I'll protect her, whatever the cost, even if it means confession, prison hanging. Even then, William nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. Then we'll find another way. There's always another way. Ruth wanted to believe him, wanted to think that 30 years of running could end in something other than a noose. But hope was a luxury she had long ago stopped affording herself. She left the sheriff's office. The sun was past its zenith now. Afternoon shadows stretched across the street. The temperature dropped. October in Montana was a daily reminder that winter waited, patient, inevitable. Ruth stood on the boardwalk, uncertain. She could go home, face Iris, try to explain the unexplainable, or she could ride out, confront Ezra directly, take control of a situation that had been controlling her. Before she could decide, a man approached, well-dressed, clean-shaven, out of place in this rough frontier town. His boots were polished, his coat pressed, his manner smooth. Mrs. Marlowe, Vernon Slade. I believe we should talk. Ruth had never met the man. But she knew the type, land speculator, opportunist, the kind who turned other people's tragedies into profit. I don't believe we have business, Ruth said. Slade smiled, all teeth and no warmth. On the contrary, we have a great deal of business. Walk with me. It was not a request. Something in his tone, in his posture, suggested that refusal would be unwise. They walked, away from the main street, toward the edge of town where buildings gave way to open land, where conversations could be had without ears nearby. Slade spoke as they walked, his voice casual, conversational. as if discussing the weather. "You have a beautiful piece of property, Mrs. Marlowe. 80 acres, good water, access to the valley. It's exactly what I need. It's not for sale." "Everything is for sale. It's just a matter of price." They stopped at the edge of a small rise. Below, the town spread out. Beyond, the plains stretched endless. Ruth's ranch was visible in the distance, a small collection of buildings, a tiny mark of human presence in all that vastness. "I'm prepared to offer you $500, Slade said. "3 times what your land is worth. You could start over anywhere, do anything." "And if I refuse?" Slade's smile widened. "Then Ezra Dutton's quest for justice becomes very well funded. Lawyers, marshals, perhaps even newspaper reporters. The story of Constance Ray, the famous assassin hiding in Montana for 30 years. It would be quite sensational." So there it was, the leverage, the threat made explicit. Ruth turned to face him fully. "You're using a dying man's grief. I'm providing him resources to achieve his goal. What he does with those resources is his choice. You're despicable." "I'm a businessman. There's a railroad coming through this valley. Your land is the key route. I will have it. The only question is whether you walk away with money in your pocket or in chains." Ruth felt rage building, cold, controlled. The same rage that had once made her climb rooftops and sight down scopes. The rage of being powerless, of being hunted, of being someone's obstacle to be removed. But she had learned something in 30 years. Rage uncontrolled was useless. Rage channeled was a tool. "I need time to consider," she said. Slade nodded. "You have 3 days. After that, the territorial judge arrives. Ezra has already filed a complaint. The law will be involved. Your time for quiet solutions will be over." He tipped his hat, walked away, left Ruth standing on the rise, looking at her land, at the life she had built, at everything that was about to be taken. She rode home slowly, thinking, planning. By the time she arrived, the sun touched the western mountains. Light bled across the sky, red and gold and purple, beautiful and indifferent. Iris's horse was gone. A note on the table, brief, painful. "Staying in town. Need space. Don't come looking for me." Ruth crumpled the note, then smoothed it out, folded it carefully, put it in her pocket. Next to the letter from the orphanage, the accumulated weight of written words, of truths that could not be unwritten. She built a fire, made coffee, sat. The cabin creaked around her, settling into night. She thought about Slade's offer, about Ezra's grief, about Iris's hurt, about 30 years of choices that had led here. What was the right thing to do? Confess, give up the land, disappear again, or fight? But fight how? And at what cost? She had no answers, only questions that circled like vultures. A knock at the door. Ruth stepped back instinctively, measuring distance angles, old reflexes she thought she had buried. She opened the door. Gabriel Dutton stood outside, his hat in his hands, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Marlowe, I apologize for the late hour. May I come in?" Ruth stepped aside. Gabriel entered, looked around the small cabin, at the simple furnishings, the life of modest means. He seemed uncomfortable, as if wealth made him ill at ease with poverty. "Coffee," Ruth offered. "Please," she poured. They sat. The ritual of hospitality even in crisis. The small civilities that held society together. Gabriel drank, set down the cup, looked at her directly. "My father met with Iris this morning." Ruth's breath caught. "I know, she rode out to his camp. He told her things. About Preston, about you, about Kansas. How much? Not everything. He still doesn't know you're Constance Ray. He only knows that you were in Kansas, that you knew of Preston's activities. He's trying to make Iris believe you had some connection, trying to drive a wedge." Ruth closed her eyes, felt the walls closing in. What did Iris say? She listened. Then she left. She's staying at the schoolhouse with the teacher, Miss Brennan. She's confused, hurt, looking for answers. Answers I can't give without destroying everything. Gabriel leaned forward. "Mrs. Marlowe, Ruth, I came to tell you something my father doesn't know, something I discovered in his papers." He reached into his coat, drew out a folded document. Spread it on the table. Ruth looked at it. Old paper, faded ink, a letter. "This is from Preston Dutton to his wife Mary, written in 1858. A year before he died. Gabriel's finger traced the lines. "Read this part." Ruth read. The handwriting was careful, educated. The words were not. "Today we burned the Morrison farm. 15 people inside. They would not give up the runners. So we locked the doors and set fire. Their screams were justice. God's work done through righteous hands." The words sat heavy, ugly, undeniable. "There are more letters," Gabriel said. "Dozens, all describing raids, murders, acts that no law would condone, acts that make him a monster by any measure. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand something. My father has spent 30 years mourning Preston, 30 years building him into a saint, a martyr. But Preston was not a saint. He was a killer, and whoever stopped him did the world a service." Gabriel's voice was quiet, intense. "I loved my uncle, the idea of him, the stories my father told. But when I found these letters, I realized those stories were lies. My father needed to believe Preston was good, needed to believe his death was an injustice. Because otherwise, his whole life has been built on a false foundation." Ruth understood, saw the parallel. The way people constructed narratives to survive grief. The way truth became malleable when it served the story we needed to tell ourselves. "What do you want from me?" Ruth asked. "Help me expose Vernon Slade. He's using my father, using you, using everyone to get what he wants. If we can destroy Slade's scheme, maybe we can stop this whole thing before it consumes everyone." "And your father? What about his grief, his need for justice?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried pain. "I don't know. Maybe some grief can't be answered. Maybe some needs can't be satisfied. But I know that Slade turning my father into a weapon is wrong. That has to stop." Ruth thought, calculated, saw possibilities, dangers, but also a path, narrow, treacherous. But there. "All right," she said. "What do you need from me?" They talked long into the night, made plans. Gabriel left near midnight. Ruth sat alone again, but this time with something she had not felt in days: purpose, direction, perhaps even hope. She slept fitfully. Dreams came, not of Kansas this time, of Iris as a child, laughing, running through grass, calling for her mother. Ruth woke with tears on her face, did not remember crying, did not remember falling asleep. Morning came. Ruth rose, prepared. Today would bring confrontation, resolution, or ruin. She rode to town. The streets were quiet, too early for most people, the saloon still dark, the general store not yet open. Only the sheriff's office showed light. William was there, waiting. He looked as though he had not slept either. Two people carrying similar burdens, familiar with the weight of wakefulness. "Gabriel told me the plan," William said. "It's risky. Everything is risky now. If Slade doesn't take the bait, he'll take it. Men like him are predictable. Greed makes them so." They waited. An hour passed. The town woke around them. People emerged. Business began. The ordinary day layering over the extraordinary. At mid-morning, a boy ran to the sheriff's office, out of breath, excited. "Sheriff Cord, Mr. Slade says to come to his office. Says it's important. Official business." William looked at Ruth. She nodded. They walked together, through the street, past curious eyes, to the land office where Vernon Slade conducted his affairs. Slade sat behind a large desk, papers spread before him, a smile on his face, confident, certain of victory. "Sheriff Cord, Mrs. Marlowe, thank you for coming. I have documents here, a formal complaint from Ezra Dutton, allegations of murder, quite serious." He slid papers across the desk. William picked them up, read. His face showed nothing. "These are 30 years old, outside statute of limitations for territorial law." Perhaps. But they do raise questions, questions a judge might want answered, questions that might prove embarrassing, unless, of course, Mrs. Marlowe is willing to be reasonable about the sale of her property. This was the moment. Ruth felt it, the pivot point. Everything depended on what happened next. She reached into her coat, drew out a folded paper, placed it on Slade's desk. "Before we discuss my property, perhaps you would like to explain these." Slade unfolded the paper. His smile faltered. Ruth watched his face, watched understanding dawn, watched confidence crack. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" bank records showing payments to Ezra Dutton, correspondence between you and territorial officials about the railroad route, maps showing land acquisitions, all very interesting, especially the parts about bribes. Slade's jaw tightened. This proves nothing. Perhaps not legally, but imagine how it would look in a newspaper. Land speculator manipulating a dying man's grief to steal property, using the law as a weapon, paying off officials. The territorial governor might have questions. William stepped forward. I've already sent copies to Helena, to the marshal there, and to the newspaper. They're very interested. Slade stood, anger replacing his earlier smoothness. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, resources. So do I, William said. Funny thing about being sheriff, you make friends. Other sheriffs, marshals, judges who actually care about the law. Your connections won't help when federal prosecutors get involved. The standoff held, tension vibrating in the small office. Then Slade's shoulders sagged, just slightly, the first crack in his armor. What do you want? He asked. Leave, Ruth said. Leave this town. Leave this valley. Drop the complaint. Leave Ezra Dutton alone. Disappear. And if I don't, then we let the law run its course. Every scheme you've built falls apart. Every official you've bribed gets exposed. You'll be lucky to avoid prison. Slade looked between them, calculating, searching for angles. Finding none, finally he laughed, bitter, defeated. You think this changes anything? Dutton still wants justice. His son might have turned on me, but the old man won't quit. He'll still come for you. That's between him and me, Ruth said. But it won't involve you. Slade gathered his papers, moved toward the door, stopped, looked back. You've won today, but victory won't taste as sweet as you think. Some debts can't be escaped. Some pasts can't be outrun. He left. The door closed behind him. Ruth and William stood in the sudden silence. He's right, you know, William said. Ezra won't stop just because Slade is gone. I know, but at least now it's honest. No manipulation, no hidden schemes, just two people and the truth. Is that better? It's cleaner. They walked back to the sheriff's office. The street felt different now, lighter somehow, as if removing one layer of complexity had made the air easier to breathe. Inside, William poured coffee. They sat, the familiar ritual, the comfortable silence of old friends. What will you do about Iris? William asked. I don't know. Tell her the truth, I suppose. All of it. Let her decide. That's brave. It's necessary. I've lied enough, to her, to myself. Time for honesty, whatever it costs. A knock at the door. Gabriel entered. His face showed relief. Slade just left town. I watched him go, took 2 horses and a wagon full of papers. He's not coming back. William nodded. Good. My father wants to see you, Gabriel said to Ruth. Both of you, at his camp, tomorrow at noon. He says it's time to settle things. Ruth felt her stomach tighten. This was it, the final confrontation. No more delays, no more intermediaries. I'll be there, she said. Gabriel left. Ruth and William sat in silence. Outside, the day continued. People walked, horses passed. The world turned regardless of individual drama. I should go, Ruth said. Prepare. For whatever comes. She stood. William stood with her. They looked at each other. Decades of history between them, love that had been, friendship that remained. Ruth, William said, if this goes badly tomorrow, if Ezra pushes for legal action, if it comes to trial, I'll stand with you, testify about the context, about Kansas, about what those times were like. You won't face it alone. Ruth felt something warm in her chest, gratitude, relief, the knowledge that even in the worst outcome she would not be entirely alone. Thank you, William. She left the office, walked to her horse. The afternoon sun slanted low, shadows stretched long. She mounted, rode toward home. But halfway there she changed direction, turned toward town, toward the schoolhouse, toward her daughter. Some conversations could not wait. Some truths demanded speaking, regardless of readiness. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, small, white-painted wood, a bell tower. Inside, the sound of children's voices, recitation, learning, the future being shaped one lesson at a time. Ruth waited outside, patient, the way she had learned to wait on rooftops, the way she had learned to wait for the right moment, the right shot, the patience of the hunter. The door opened. Children spilled out, laughing, running, free in the way only children can be, unburdened by the past, uncertain of the future. Living entirely in the present moment, Iris appeared last, saw Ruth, stopped. Her face showed conflict, anger and love and confusion, all warring for dominance. "Mother," she said, formal, distant. "Iris, can we talk? I don't know what there is to say. Everything. There's everything to say, and I need to say it. All of it. No more half-truths, no more protection. Just the truth, however ugly." Iris looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but not here, not in town." They rode together, silent, side by side, mother and daughter. Two women connected by love and lies and the terrible complexities of family. They stopped at the creek that marked Ruth's eastern property line. The water ran clear over smooth stones, the sound peaceful, eternal, indifferent to human suffering. They dismounted, sat on a fallen log. The bark was rough beneath them, real, solid, something to anchor to while difficult words were spoken. Ruth began, told everything, who she had been, what she had done, the 11 men, the contracts, Preston Dutton, the shot that ended him, the fire that ended Constance Ray, the adoption, the terrible coincidence that had bound them together. She spoke for a long time, her voice steady. No excuses, no justifications, just facts. Truth laid bare like bones picked clean. Iris listened, did not interrupt, did not cry, just absorbed it all, every terrible detail. When Ruth finished, silence fell. The creek murmured. Birds called. The world continued its ancient patterns. Finally Iris spoke. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Did he deserve it? My father, Preston Dutton, did he deserve to die?" Ruth had thought about this question for 30 years, had circled it, had tried to answer it in 1,000 different ways. Now facing her daughter, she gave the only honest answer she had. "I don't know. He killed innocent people, burned families alive, terrorized communities. By any measure, he was a murderer. But I didn't kill him because he was evil. I killed him because I was paid to. That's the truth. I was an assassin. I took contracts. I didn't judge. I just pulled the trigger." "So you're no better than he was." The words struck hard, true in ways Ruth could not deny. "Maybe not, probably not. I've spent 30 years trying to be better, trying to build something good from the wreckage, but you're right. The blood is still there, still on my hands. It doesn't wash off." Iris stood, walked to the creek's edge, looked down at her reflection in the moving water. "I don't know who you are," she said. "I thought I did. I thought you were my mother, a widow, a rancher, a simple woman with a simple life. But you're a stranger, a killer, someone I don't recognize." "I'm both," Ruth said. "I'm the woman who raised you, who loved you, who taught you to read and ride and be kind. And I'm also the woman who killed your father. Both things are true. Both are me." Iris turned. Tears streaked her face now, finally released. "How am I supposed to forgive that? How am I supposed to look at you and not see his blood? I don't know. Maybe you can't. Maybe forgiveness is impossible, but I need you to understand one thing. Everything I did after Kansas, I did to try to make things right, to try to balance the scales. I raised you with love, real love, not guilt, not penance, love. You are my daughter, in every way that matters. Except blood. Blood is just biology. Love is choice. I chose you. Every day for 21 years. I chose to be your mother. That has to count for something." Iris sank to the ground, crying openly now, great racking sobs, the accumulated grief and confusion and betrayal pouring out. Ruth went to her, knelt beside her, put her arms around her daughter, expected to be pushed away. But Iris did not push. She collapsed into Ruth's embrace, held on, cried into her shoulder, mother and daughter clinging to each other while truth settled around them like snow. They stayed that way until the sun touched the mountains, until shadows grew long, until the tears finally stopped. When Iris pulled back, her face was blotchy, exhausted. But something had shifted. Some barrier had cracked. "I don't forgive you," she said. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I don't hate you either. I just need time. I understand. Tomorrow Mr. Dutton wants to meet. Gabriel told me. He wants me there, wants me to hear the whole story, his side, your side, everything. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. I need to hear it all, need to understand, need to know who my father really was and who you really are. Then I can decide what to do, who to be, how to move forward. Ruth nodded. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she deserved. They rode back in darkness. Stars filled the sky, more stars than seemed possible, light from distant suns. Light that had traveled years to reach this moment, this place. These two women trying to find their way through darkness towards something resembling truth. At the cabin, Iris dismounted, looked at Ruth. I'll stay tonight, in my old room. But don't expect things to be normal. They can't be. Not now. Maybe not ever. I know. They went inside. Ruth built up the fire, made supper. They ate in silence, comfortable silence, or perhaps just exhausted silence, hard to tell the difference. After Iris went to her room, the door closed. Ruth sat by the fire, watched flames dance, thought about tomorrow. Ezra Dutton wanted to settle things, wanted truth, wanted his reckoning. Ruth would give it to him, would give him all of it, whatever the cost. She thought about the rifle under the floorboards, about Constance Ray, about the woman she had been, the woman she had tried to stop being. Tomorrow would determine if that woman was truly dead, or if she had simply been waiting, patient, for the past to catch up. Ruth stood, walked to her bedroom, lay down fully clothed, did not expect to sleep. But exhaustion claimed her, pulled her down into darkness, into dreams. She dreamed of Kansas, of rooftops and scopes, of men falling, of fire, of a young girl with no future becoming a woman with blood on her hands. She dreamed of Iris as a baby, of holding her for the first time, of feeling love so fierce it hurt, of making silent promises to do better. Be better. She dreamed of tomorrow, of Ezra Dutton, of confessions and consequences, of endings and beginnings, and the impossible space between. When she woke, dawn was breaking. The cabin was cold. Frost covered the windows. Her breath misted in the air. Today was the day. No more delays. No more running. Ruth rose, dressed, made coffee, waited for Iris to wake, waited for the sun to climb, waited for noon and whatever it would bring. The past had arrived, was arriving, would continue arriving until every debt was paid. Ruth was ready, or as ready as anyone could ever be to face the consequences of choices made 30 years ago, in another life, by another woman, who was somehow still her. Noon approached like a sentence being read. The sun climbed toward its zenith, shadows shortened. The world held itself in perfect balance between morning and afternoon, between past and future, between what had been and what would be. Ruth stood on her porch. She had dressed carefully, not for vanity, but for dignity. A clean shirt, her late husband's vest, boots polished, hair brushed and tied back. If she was going to face judgment, she would do it looking like someone worthy of being judged rather than dismissed. Iris emerged from her room. She too had dressed with care. Simple dress, dark blue, her mother's shawl around her shoulders, the shawl Ruth had worn through a dozen Montana winters. A small gesture, perhaps meaningless. Perhaps the first thread of connection being tentatively rewoven. They did not speak, just stood together on the porch, waiting. Two women about to walk into fire, together or apart. That remained to be seen. William Cord arrived first, on horseback. He dismounted, tied his horse, climbed the porch steps. He wore his badge, official capacity. But his eyes were those of a friend, of someone who would stand witness to whatever came. "Ready?" he asked. Ruth nodded. Words felt unnecessary, or perhaps she had no words left. Had used them all in confessions and explanations. Now there was only action, only the walking forward into whatever awaited. They rode together, Ruth, Iris, and William, 3 horses moving at a walk, no hurry. The thing that awaited them would wait, would not begin until they arrived. So they took their time, let the land pass slowly, let the moment stretch, because once they arrived at Ezra Dutton's camp, time would accelerate. Events would cascade. and nothing would ever be the same. Gabriel met them at the edge of the camp. He had aged in the past days, the weight of choosing between father and conscience showing in the lines around his eyes, in the set of his shoulders. "He's ready," Gabriel said. "But I need to warn you, he's not well. The disease is progressing. He had a bad night. He's weak, in pain, but determined." "Will this kill him?" Ruth asked. The strain of this confrontation, probably not today, but it's not helping. Each day takes more from him. They walked into the camp. It was simple, a tent, a fire ring, supplies stacked neatly, the camp of a man who had lived on the trail, who knew how to make a place anywhere, who carried home on his back like a turtle carries its shell. Ezra Dutton sat on a camp stool near the fire. He looked smaller than Ruth remembered. Illness had hollowed him, made him seem insubstantial, as if a strong wind might blow him away, but his eyes were sharp, focused. The eyes of a man using the last of his strength for a single purpose. He looked at Ruth, then at Iris, then back to Ruth. "Mrs. Marlowe, thank you for coming." His voice was rough. Each word cost him, but he spoke clearly, with purpose. "Mr. Dutton," Ruth said, formal, careful. Ezra gestured to logs arranged around the fire, makeshift seating. "Please, sit. This will take time. We should be comfortable." They sat. The arrangement felt ritualistic. A circle, a council. Judge and accused and witnesses all together. Democracy of the frontier. Justice negotiated rather than imposed. Ezra coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Gabriel moved to help him, but Ezra waved him off, straightened, breathed, continued. "I have spent 23 years looking for the person who killed my brother. 23 years believing that finding them would bring peace, would make sense of Preston's death, would give meaning to my grief." He paused, looked at the fire. The flames danced, indifferent to human pain. "I found you 8 months ago, followed you, watched you, learned your routines, your life. I expected to find a monster, someone cruel, someone evil. Instead, I found a widow, a mother, a woman living quietly, bothering no one." Ruth said nothing, just listened, let him speak. This was his moment, his reckoning. It confused me, made me question. But then I reminded myself that evil often wears pleasant masks, that killers can seem kind, that the woman I was watching had murdered my brother, and that fact could not be erased by any amount of ordinary living. Iris shifted beside Ruth. Ruth could feel her daughter's tension, the coiled energy of someone preparing to defend or attack. She touched Iris's hand lightly, a gentle pressure. "Wait, listen, not yet." "Yesterday," Ezra continued, "my son showed me letters I had not seen before, had not known existed. Letters my brother Preston wrote to his wife, to others. Letters describing things he had done, acts I had not known about, had not imagined." His voice cracked, not from illness, from emotion, from the shattering of a lifetime's beliefs. The man I mourned for 23 years was not the man I thought he was. He was a killer, a butcher. He burned families, hunted human beings like animals, and he enjoyed it. The letters made that clear. He reveled in the violence, called it God's work. Ezra looked at Ruth now, really looked, seeing her perhaps for the first time as something other than his enemy. "I have a proposal," he said, "a way to settle this, to bring truth into the light where it belongs." Ruth waited. Her heart beat steady, slow, the way it had on rooftops, the calm that came before the shot. Tomorrow the territorial judge arrives in town. He will hold court, hear cases. I propose we go before him, publicly, in front of the whole town, and we tell the truth, all of it. "What truth?" Ruth asked. "I will read Preston's letters, every word. Let people know what kind of man he was, what he did, the evil he committed, and then you will confess. Tell them who you are, what you did, why you did it. Let the town hear both sides. Let them judge. Let justice be done in the open rather than in shadows." William shifted. "Ezra, you understand what you're asking. If Ruth confesses to murder in front of a judge, he has to act, has to arrest her. There will be a trial, possibly execution." "I know, but I also know that hiding truth serves no one. My brother's evil should be known, and so should the response to that evil. Let history judge. Let the law judge, but let it be honest." Ruth felt a strange calm descend. This was it, the choice. Confess and face the consequences, or run again, become someone new, start over, leave Iris, leave William, leave everything. She looked at Iris. Her daughter's face showed conflict, fear and anger and something else. Something that might have been respect for what Ruth could not tell, but it was there. "All right," Ruth said. "I agree. Tomorrow, public confession, full truth, whatever follows." Ezra nodded, seemed to deflate slightly, as if agreeing had been his last act of strength, and now he could rest. "There is one condition," Ruth said. Ezra looked up, wary. "You read Preston's letters first, before I confess. I want people to understand the context, to know what Kansas was like, what men like Preston did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding." Ezra considered, then nodded. "Agreed." They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere a bird sang. The mountain wind moved through pine trees. Life continued its patterns regardless of human drama. Iris spoke, her first words since arriving. "Mr. Dutton, you loved your brother." It was not a question, statement of fact. Ezra looked at her, saw Preston's eyes, Preston's chin. The echo of his brother in this young woman's face. "Yes," he said, "I did. He was 12 years older, raised me after our parents died. I thought he was a hero. The letters show he was a monster, but I loved him. That doesn't change." "I never knew him," Iris said. "Never had the chance to love him, or hate him. He's just a name to me, a ghost, but he's half of who I am. His blood runs in me. Does that make me a monster too?" The question hung in the air, raw, vulnerable, seeking answer to the unanswerable. "No," Ezra said firmly. "We are not our fathers, not their sins, not their virtues. We are ourselves, what we choose, what we build. You are not Preston. You are Iris." Iris looked at Ruth. "And she is not Constance. She is Ruth, my mother, who raised me, loved me. That has to matter." "It does," Ezra said. "It complicates things, makes justice harder to define. But it matters." They talked into the afternoon, not about guilt or innocence. About harder things, about how people become who they are, about choices made in desperation, about the difference between law and morality, about whether redemption was possible or just a story people told themselves to sleep at night. As the sun began its descent, they prepared to leave. Ezra stood, wavered. Gabriel caught him, held him steady. "Tomorrow," Ezra said. "We finish this, one way or another." "Tomorrow," Ruth agreed. They rode back in silence. The enormity of what they had agreed to settling over them like snow. By this time tomorrow everyone would know. Ruth Marlowe would cease to exist. Constance Ray would live again. And whatever followed would follow. That night Ruth could not sleep. She sat at her table, wrote letters, to Iris, to William, to Gabriel even, letters to be opened if she was arrested, if she was convicted, if she hanged. Letters saying the things that might not get said if events moved too quickly. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the lamp oil ran low, until the words ran out and only blank paper remained. Iris appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, hair loose, looking younger than her 21 years. "Mother," the word pierced Ruth's heart. Not Ruth. Mother. "Can't sleep," Ruth said. "Neither can I." Iris sat. They looked at each other across the table, the same table where Ruth had lied, where truth had finally emerged, where their relationship had broken and perhaps was beginning to mend. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes." "Of hanging?" "Of losing you. The rest I can bear. But if tomorrow drives you away forever, if you decide you can't live with what I am, that terrifies me." Iris reached across the table, took Ruth's hand. Her grip was strong, warm, real. "I don't know what tomorrow brings. Don't know how I'll feel when you stand up and confess to killing my father. Don't know if I can forgive or forget. But I know this. You are my mother. Whatever else is true, that is true. And I won't abandon you." Ruth felt tears, the first she had allowed herself in days. They ran hot down her face. She did not wipe them away. Let them fall. Let Iris see her grief, her fear, her humanity. They sat holding hands until dawn light crept through the windows, until the day of reckoning arrived, whether they were ready or not. The town square filled early. Word had spread. A public confession. A settling of old debts. Entertainment was scarce on the frontier. People gathered like they would for a hanging, with the same mix of horror and fascination. The territorial judge had arrived the night before, Judge Marcus Weatherby, 60 years old, gray beard, sharp eyes, a man who had seen every variety of human wickedness and maintained somehow the belief that law mattered, that justice was possible. He sat at a table brought from the saloon, papers before him. The town sheriff, William Cord, stood beside him, official, formal. But William's eyes found Ruth in the crowd, held her, gave her strength. Ruth stood near the front, Iris beside her, Gabriel on her other side. Ezra sat in a chair, too weak to stand for long, but present, bearing witness. Judge Weatherby called the gathering to order, his voice carried, trained by years of speaking in crowded courtrooms. We are here today for an unusual proceeding, not a trial, not yet, but a public testimony. Mr. Ezra Dutton has information about events from Kansas Territory in 1859. Mrs. Ruth Marlowe has agreed to provide context and confession. I will listen. The town will listen. And then we will decide how the law should proceed. He nodded to Ezra. Mr. Dutton, you may begin. Ezra stood. Slowly. Gabriel helped him, handed him a bundle of letters, old paper, yellowed. The ink faded but still legible. Ezra's voice was weak, but in the silence it carried. These are letters written by my brother Preston Dutton between 1857 and 1859. I will read selected passages. I ask that you listen, that you understand what kind of man he was before you hear what happened to him. He began to read, each letter more horrifying than the last. Descriptions of raids, of families burned alive, of children sold back into slavery, of violence committed with glee, with righteousness, with the certainty that God approved. The crowd grew silent. Some people wept. Others looked away. These were people who remembered the Kansas troubles, who had lost friends, family, who had their own scars from those years. Ezra read for 20 minutes, his voice growing weaker, but he did not stop, did not spare anyone, not his brother, not himself, for having believed the lies, not the town for being willing to hear difficult truth. When he finished, he sat, exhausted, spent. Gabriel offered him water. He drank, coughed, steadied himself. Judge Weatherby looked shaken. Mr. Dutton, these letters describe serious crimes. Why were they never reported to authorities? Because I never knew they existed. They were among his wife's belongings, stored, forgotten. My son found them recently. I had spent 23 years mourning a saint. Instead, I had been mourning a devil. The judge nodded, turned to Ruth. Mrs. Marlowe, you have something to add. Ruth stood, her legs steady, her voice clear. This was the moment. No more hiding, no more running. My name is not Ruth Marlowe. It is Constance Ray. I was born in Ohio in 1840, orphaned at 12, moved to Kansas at 16. Between 1858 and 1859, I worked as a contract killer. I was hired by abolitionist families to stop men like Preston Dutton, men who terrorized communities, who murdered with impunity, who the law would not touch. The crowd murmured, shocked, fascinated. Ruth continued, I killed 11 men during those 2 years. Preston Dutton was the last. August 12, 1859, Wichita, Kansas. I shot him from a warehouse roof, 340 yards. He died instantly. After that, I staged my own death, disappeared. Became Ruth Marlowe, moved here. Tried to build a different life. She paused, looked at Iris. Her daughter's face was pale, but she nodded, encouraging Ruth to continue. I did not know when I adopted Iris from an orphanage in 1871 that she was Preston Dutton's daughter. That knowledge came later. By then I loved her. She was mine. I kept the secret, raised her, tried to be worthy of her, tried to make something good from the wreckage of what I had been. Judge Weatherby leaned forward. Mrs. Ray, you confessed to 11 murders. I confessed to 11 killings. Whether they were murders depends on your definition. Every man I killed was himself a murderer, a slaver, a terrorist. But yes, I took money to end their lives. I pulled the trigger. The responsibility is mine." The judge sat back, thinking. The crowd waited, silent now, transfixed. These crimes, if crimes they were, occurred in Kansas Territory in 1859. We are now in Montana Territory in 1889. 30 years have passed. The legal question is complex. He shuffled papers, read, frowned. Under territorial law, there is no statute of limitations for murder. However, Kansas Territory no longer exists. It became a state in 1861. Montana Territory operates under different jurisdiction. The question of whether I can even hear this case is unclear. William spoke. "Your Honor, if I may, Kansas during the Troubles was barely governed. Martial law was declared multiple times. Militias operated freely. The line between legal and illegal action was blurred. Many acts that would be crimes in peacetime were considered justified resistance." The judge nodded. "Sheriff Cord makes a valid point. The historical context matters." He looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Ray, did you act alone or were you part of an organized resistance?" Ruth considered. This was the question. How she answered would shape everything. "I acted alone, but I was hired by organized groups, abolitionist networks, people fighting to end slavery. They provided information, payment. But the killings were mine, my choice, my hand on the trigger. And you felt this was justified." "At the time, yes. Now I am less certain. I know I stopped men who were killing innocents. But I also know I became something dark, something that still haunts me. Justice and revenge are hard to separate when you are young and angry, and the law offers no protection." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I am going to make a ruling. It may not satisfy everyone, but it is what the law and my conscience allow." He stood. The crowd leaned forward. "Constance Ray, you have confessed to 11 killings in Kansas Territory between 1858 and 1859. However, after reviewing territorial law and the specific historical context, I find that these actions, while violent, were taken during a period of civil conflict. Kansas Territory during the Troubles was effectively a war zone. Actions taken in defense of escaped slaves or in resistance to illegal militias fall into a gray area of the law." He paused. Let his words settle. "Furthermore, you have lived 30 years as a law-abiding citizen of Montana Territory. You have raised a daughter, contributed to your community, caused no harm. The question before me is whether prosecuting you now serves justice or vengeance." Another pause. The silence absolute. "I rule that Montana Territory has no jurisdiction to prosecute you for acts committed in Kansas 30 years ago. Case dismissed." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some protested. Ezra sat motionless, his face unreadable. But then Ezra stood, shakily. Gabriel tried to stop him, but he shook his head. "Your Honor, I invoke my right to civil action. Mrs. Ray may be free from criminal prosecution, but she owes my family a blood debt. Under Montana law, I can demand compensation, land, labor, or financial restitution." The judge frowned. "Mr. Dutton, that is your right. What do you demand?" "Her land, the ranch, 80 acres, transfer of deed to the Dutton family." Ruth felt the ground tilt. She had expected arrest, trial, even execution. But she had not expected this, to lose her home. The place she had built, the only thing she had left to give Iris. Before she could speak, Iris stepped forward. "No." Every eye turned to her. She faced Ezra directly. "That land is half mine. My father Jacob Marlowe left it to both of us. Ruth cannot give you what is partly mine, and I will not agree." Ezra looked at her. "Then what do you propose?" Iris took a breath. Ruth saw her gathering courage, saw her becoming someone new in this moment, someone stronger than she had been yesterday. "I propose a different settlement. You want justice. You want acknowledgement of your brother's death and your family's pain. I understand. But taking our land solves nothing, punishes us for the past without building any future." She stepped closer to Ezra. "Here is my offer. You and Gabriel come to our ranch. Work it with us. For 1 full year. Live there. Eat with us. Labor beside us. At the end of that year, if you still want the land, I will give you my half. But give us 1 year to show you that revenge is not the same as peace." The crowd murmured. The proposal was strange, unprecedented. But there was a logic to it, a fairness. Ezra stared at Iris. You would take in the family of the man your mother killed, work beside us, break bread with us. Yes, because I am tired of cycles of violence, tired of old debts destroying new lives. My father was a murderer. My mother killed him. Both those things are true, but they don't have to define what happens next. We can choose something different. Ezra looked at Gabriel. Father and son communicated wordlessly. Then Ezra turned back to Iris. I am dying. I have 6 months, perhaps less. Are you offering me a place to die? I am offering you a place to live, however much time you have left, and then offering Gabriel a choice about what to do with that time after you are gone. Ezra's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this? Why show kindness to me? Iris looked at Ruth, then back to Ezra. Because someone has to break the cycle. Someone has to choose forgiveness over revenge, love over hate. It might as well be us. The judge watched this exchange with something like wonder. Mr. Dutton, do you accept this proposal? Ezra sat down heavily, coughed. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Yes, I accept. The judge nodded. Then let it be so recorded. The civil claim is settled. Mr. Ezra Dutton and his son Gabriel will reside at the Marlowe Ranch for 1 year. At the end of that term, the parties will reconvene to determine final disposition of the property. He struck his gavel. The sound rang out. Final. Binding. This court is adjourned. The crowd dispersed slowly, talking, arguing, processing what they had witnessed. Ruth stood frozen, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. She had confessed to murder, been absolved, lost her land, regained it, all in the space of an hour. Iris came to her, put her arms around her, held her. It will be all right, Mother. We will make it all right. Ruth held her daughter, felt the strength in her young body, the courage, the hope. Things Ruth had lost decades ago, things Iris still possessed. Perhaps they would be enough. The winter that followed was strange. Ezra and Gabriel moved into the ranch. The arrangement was awkward at first. Meals were silent, conversation minimal. 4 people bound together by history and obligation rather than choice. But slowly something shifted. Gabriel proved skilled with carpentry. He repaired the barn roof, built new chicken coops, made himself useful. Ezra, despite his illness, worked when he could. His experience with livestock showed. He knew things about animal husbandry that Ruth had never learned. They began to talk. Small conversations at first, about weather, about work, but gradually deeper, about Kansas, about the war, about choices made in desperate times. Ezra told stories about growing up with Preston, about the brother before violence claimed him, before ideology turned him into something monstrous. Ruth listened, understood that Ezra's grief was not for the man Preston became, but for the boy he had been, for potential lost, for innocence destroyed by the poison of slavery and war. Ruth told her own stories, about being orphaned, about learning to survive, about the weight of the rifle in her hands and the impossible choices of youth. She did not excuse what she had done, but she helped Ezra understand the context, the desperation, the absence of other options. Iris and Gabriel developed a careful friendship. He was 7 years older, serious, thoughtful. She was bright, curious. They talked about books, about ideas, about what life might look like beyond the narrow confines of revenge and obligation. But Iris kept him at a distance. Ruth saw it, saw her daughter protecting herself, not willing to risk love when everything else felt so fragile. The winter deepened, snow fell, the ranch became isolated, they were thrown together even more. 4 people in close quarters, no escape from each other, from the truths they had spoken, from the futures they were trying to build. Ezra's health declined. Some days he could not rise. Gabriel would sit with him, read to him. Ruth prepared special meals, soups and broths, things his weakening body could tolerate. Iris brewed teas meant to ease pain. They all became caregivers, despite everything, or perhaps because of everything. One evening in February, Ezra called them together. He looked worse, gray, hollow, the disease eating him from within. I need to say something, he rasped. while I still can." They gathered, sat, waited. I came here for revenge, for justice, for some sense that Preston's death mattered, that my grief had purpose. I thought finding his killer would give me peace. He coughed, a terrible sound. Gabriel offered water, but Ezra waved it away. "But living here, working beside you, seeing who you are. Ruth, you are not a monster. You are a woman who did terrible things in terrible times, and you have spent 30 years trying to be better. That counts." He looked at Iris. "And you. You carry Preston's blood, but you are nothing like him. You're kind, thoughtful, brave in ways he never was. You give me hope that people can transcend their origins, can choose who they become." Tears ran down his weathered face. "I don't forgive you, Ruth. I can't. Preston was my brother. I loved him despite everything. But I understand you. And understanding is perhaps more important than forgiveness." Ruth felt her own tears. "Thank you, Ezra. That is more than I deserve. We all deserve more than we get, and less. The accounting is impossible, so we do what we can. We try. We fail. We try again." He looked at Gabriel. "Son, when I am gone, you decide. Keep the land. Give it back. Whatever feels right. But do not let my grief chain you. You are free. Make your own choices." They sat together until the fire burned low, until Ezra's breathing evened into sleep. Gabriel carried him to bed. The rest went to their own rooms. But something had shifted. Some weight had lifted. Spring came late that year. Snow lingered. But eventually the world warmed. Green returned. Life resumed its patterns. Ezra died in early April, peacefully, in his sleep. Gabriel found him in the morning, still. Finally at rest, they buried him on the ranch, near the creek, under a pine tree. A simple grave, a simple marker. Gabriel carved the headstone himself, just a name and dates, no epitaph. What words could capture such a complicated life? At the funeral, Ezra's final letter was read. He had written it weeks before, left it with Gabriel. The letter was addressed to Iris. Gabriel's voice shook as he read it aloud. "Iris, your father, Preston, was not a good man. The letters prove that. But you are. You have shown me more grace than I showed you, more compassion than I deserved. Do not let his sins or Ruth's define you. You are your own person. Make your own legacy. As for the land, it is yours." I have instructed Gabriel to sign over any claim. The ranch belongs to you and Ruth. Use it well. Build something good. That is the only revenge that matters. Building goodness from the wreckage of history. Thank you for giving an old man a chance to die in peace rather than bitterness. That is a gift beyond measure. Ezra Dutton. Iris wept. Ruth held her. Gabriel stood apart. His own grief private, contained. After the funeral, people drifted away, back to their lives, their own concerns. Ruth, Iris, and Gabriel remained. "What will you do now?" Ruth asked Gabriel. He looked around the ranch, at the land he had worked for months, at the place that had somehow become home. "I don't know. I thought I would leave, go back east, start over. But this place, it feels right somehow, feels like somewhere I could belong." "You are welcome to stay," Iris said, "as long as you want." Gabriel looked at her. Something passed between them, recognition, possibility, but also caution. They had both been through too much to rush into anything. "I will stay a while," he said. "Help with spring planting. Then decide." The weeks passed. Gabriel stayed, helped with the work. The ranch thrived. 3 people working together accomplished more than Ruth and Iris had alone. But as summer approached, Iris grew restless. Ruth saw it, the way her daughter gazed at horizons, the way she read newspapers from distant cities, the way she talked about the school in town with less enthusiasm. One evening, Iris sat Ruth down. They were alone. Gabriel had ridden to town for supplies. "Mother, I need to tell you something." Ruth's heart clenched. She knew this tone, had been dreading it. "I am leaving." The words hit hard despite being expected. "Where?" "Oregon. There is a teaching position, a new school. They need someone to help establish a curriculum. It is an opportunity, a chance to build something of my own." "When?" 2 weeks. So soon. Ruth had known this day would come. had known Iris needed distance, needed to become herself separate from the complicated history of this place. But knowing did not make it easier. "Do you forgive me?" Ruth asked, the question she had not dared voice until now. Iris was quiet, thinking. When she spoke, her words were careful, honest. "I do not know if forgive is the right word. I understand you. I see the impossible position you were in. I know you loved me, but something broke when I learned the truth, and I do not know if it can be fully repaired." She took Ruth's hand. "But I do not hate you. I do not blame you for trying to be better, for building a life from wreckage. And I am grateful you raised me, grateful for every moment of love and care. That has to count for something. Will I see you again? Yes. I am not abandoning you, just creating distance, space to become who I need to be, away from the shadow of all this history." Ruth nodded. "Understood. You are braver than I ever was. I learned from you how to survive, how to be strong. Those lessons matter even if the circumstances were complicated." They held each other, mother and daughter, bound by love and blood and terrible knowledge, but still connected, still family, despite everything. 2 weeks later, Iris left. Gabriel drove her to the stage station in his wagon, helped load her trunk. They said goodbye, a long look, a brief touch of hands, possibilities unspoken but acknowledged. Ruth stood on the porch, watched them go, felt the ranch grow larger and emptier simultaneously. When Gabriel returned alone, he found Ruth sitting on the steps, staring at nothing. "She will come back," he said. "Maybe, maybe not. She loves you. I know, but love is not always enough." They sat together, two people connected by shared history, by Ezra's death, by Iris's departure, by the strange alchemy that turned strangers into family. "I am staying," Gabriel said. "If that is all right. I like the work, the land, the quiet. I have nowhere else I need to be." Ruth nodded. "You are welcome." The seasons turned. Spring became summer. Summer became fall. Ruth and Gabriel worked the ranch, settled into a rhythm. They were not friends exactly, but partners, colleagues, people bound by shared purpose. Letters came from Iris, infrequent but regular, describing her new life, her teaching, the people she met, the landscape of Oregon. She sounded happy, whole, building herself anew. Ruth read each letter multiple times, kept them in a box, evidence that her daughter was thriving, that despite everything, Iris had not been destroyed by the truth, had instead been freed by it. 2 years passed. The ranch prospered. Ruth grew older, 51 now, her hands stiff in the mornings, her back aching from labor, but still capable, still strong. Gabriel took over more of the physical work. He was 30 now, settled, mature. He had built his own small cabin on the far edge of the property, maintained independence while staying close. They developed a deep respect, not love, but something perhaps more durable, mutual regard, understanding, the bond of people who had survived something terrible together and come through, changed but intact. One autumn day, Ruth walked to the creek, the same creek where she had once talked with Iris, where water ran clear over smooth stones, where the world felt momentarily peaceful. She carried something wrapped in oilcloth, heavy, familiar, the Sharp's rifle. She had not touched it since the confession, since that day in the town square when Constance Ray had died again, this time publicly, this time final. Ruth unwrapped it, looked at the metal, the wood, the tool that had defined her youth, that had made her a killer, that had set in motion everything that followed. She thought about keeping it as a reminder, a cautionary tale. But some things should not be preserved, some tools should not be passed on. Ruth walked to the deepest part of the creek, held the rifle one last time, felt its weight, its balance, its terrible efficiency. Then she threw it, hard, into the water. It sank immediately, disappeared into the current. Gone. Constance Ray's last weapon, buried in Montana mud, where it belonged. Ruth stood on the bank, felt lighter, cleaner, as if shedding the rifle had shed part of the past, not erasing it, but releasing its hold. She turned to walk back to the cabin, and stopped. A rider approached. Young woman, dusty, travel-worn. Her horse moved with the gait of long miles recently covered. The woman stopped at the fence, looked at Ruth. Her eyes were haunted, desperate. "Mrs. Marlowe." "Yes." "My name is Sarah. I am looking for work. I can shoot, ride, farm. I need a place to disappear." Ruth's breath caught. She saw herself 30 years ago, young, frightened, running from something, looking for somewhere to become someone new. She could turn this woman away, could maintain her hard-won peace, could refuse to be drawn into someone else's drama, or she could offer what had been offered to her: a chance, sanctuary, the possibility of redemption. Ruth looked at Sarah, really looked, saw the desperation, the hope, the same mixture she had once carried. "Shooting is not a skill," Ruth said. "It is a curse. Whatever you are running from, whatever you did, killing is not a solution. It is a weight you carry forever." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I know, but I have nowhere else to go." Ruth was quiet, thinking, remembering, choosing. "If you stay," Ruth said slowly, "you work. You learn to farm, to build, to make things grow instead of destroying them. The past is not erased, but it can be balanced. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, vigorous, hopeful. "Yes, I can try." Trying is all any of us can do. Ruth opened the gate, gestured for Sarah to enter, a young woman seeking refuge, an old woman offering it, the cycle continuing. But perhaps this time with wisdom, with the hard-earned knowledge that violence begets only more violence, that breaking cycles requires conscious choice, requires people willing to extend grace even when it is not deserved. Sarah dismounted, led her horse through the gate, looked at Ruth with gratitude and fear and desperate hope. "Thank you," she whispered. Ruth put a hand on her shoulder. "Thank me in a year, if you are still here, still trying, still building instead of destroying. Then thanks will mean something." They walked together toward the cabin. Gabriel emerged, saw the new arrival, raised an eyebrow. Ruth shook her head slightly. Later, she would explain later. For now there was work. There was the land. There was the possibility that people could change, could become better than they had been, could build goodness from the wreckage of history. The sun set over Montana, red and gold and purple, beautiful and indifferent. The mountains stood eternal. The creek ran its course. And on a small ranch in the vastness of the territory, 3 people prepared for evening: an old woman who had once been a killer, a young man who had learned forgiveness from his dying father, and a new arrival seeking what they had all sought: a second chance. The past lived on, woven into every choice. But it did not have to be a prison. It could be a foundation, something to build on rather than be buried under. Ruth looked back once at the creek, at the place where the rifle lay buried, where Constance Ray's last weapon rested beneath water and stone, and she smiled. Not happiness, not quite, but something close. Something earned through decades of trying, of failing, of trying again. Peace was too strong a word, but perhaps contentment. Perhaps the knowledge that she had done her best with impossible circumstances, had loved despite everything, had built something good even as the past tried to tear it down. The light faded. Stars emerged. The land settled into night. And Ruth Marlowe, once Constance Ray, walked into her home, closed the door, and let tomorrow worry about itself. She had today. In the end, perhaps that was all anyone perhaps that was all anyone could do. Try, fail, keep trying, until the last breath, until the final reckoning. Ruth sat at her table, lit a lamp, pulled out paper, began a letter to Iris, telling her about the new arrival, about the choice to offer sanctuary, about the rifle buried in the creek, about the continuing attempt to break cycles, to choose compassion over judgment, love over hate. She did not know if Iris would approve, did not know if this was wise, but it felt right, felt like the only choice that honored everything they had all been through. Outside, the Montana night deepened. Winter approached. The land prepared for sleep. And inside a small cabin, an old woman wrote by lamplight, telling stories, seeking connection, trying until the very end to make meaning from the beautiful, terrible complexity of being human. The letter ended simply. I love you, Iris. I am still trying. That is all I have to offer, all I have ever had. But it is yours, always, Mother." Ruth folded the letter, sealed it, set it aside for tomorrow's mail. Then she extinguished the lamp, walked to her bed, lay down, and let sleep come. Dreamless, deep, the sleep of someone who had finally laid down burdens too heavy to carry any further. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. But tonight Ruth Marlowe rested, and that was enough.